The Simpsons teach sentences. So we're going to start off and we're going to take a look at Marge. Marge is an independent clause. The reason why Marge is an independent clause is because Marge is an independent woman. She can survive on her own. She can feed herself, clothe herself, cook for herself, and take care of everybody else in the house. So Marge is an independent clause. Independent clauses. Just like Marge, an independent clause can survive on its own. It is a complete sentence which expresses a complete thought. So it has a subject and a verb and has a complete thought. Again, at any point, if you need to pause this video, you're more than welcome to make sure that you get the notes in your PowerPoint. So Marge technically is just like a simple sentence. We have Marge, which is also an independent clause, has a subject plus a verb. So in the sentences on your paper, if you could circle the subject and underline the verb, then we will be able to make sure you understand what a simple sentence is. So here are the sentences. Again, circle the subject, underline the verb. I'll wait just a few moments for you. Okay, so let's take a look at the first sentence. Marge walks to the lake. The subject in this sentence is Marge. The verb in this sentence is walks. The second sentence, Homer sleeps too much. The subject is Homer, and the verb is sleeps. Bart is cool. Well, the subject in this sentence is Bart. Is the verb. Lisa will want to get a dog. Lisa is going to be the subject. Will want is the verb. And the last normal person on earth is Ned. Normal person is the subject, and is the verb. So these are just to remind you of what a simple sentence looks like, and so that you can make sure you remember how to identify the subject and the verb. So let's look at some examples of independent clauses. Bart does not like to go to school. It has a subject and it has a verb and it has a complete thought. Lisa loves the saxophone. Lisa loves the saxophone has a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. And Homer does not work hard at the power plant. Those are complete subjects. It has a complete subject, it has a verb, and it also has a complete thought. If you want to, pause this and then again circle the subject, underline the verb, just so you can make sure you understand what those are. So compound sentences. A compound sentence is unique in the fact that it has an independent clause or a Marge clause. It's going to have a comma to join, and then it has a fanboy, and we'll talk about fanboys right here in just a moment. It's going to have a fanboy and then another independent clause. So it has an independent, comma, fanboy, independent. Another way to say it is a complete sentence, comma, fanboy, complete sentence. So what are these fanboys? Well, fanboys are conjunctions, and they are as follows: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. These are called fanboys, and they're just conjunctions, and they join two sentences together, or two clauses together, and in this case, independent clauses. So let's look at an example. We have Bart hates school. Well, Bart is a subject, hates is a verb, school, and this could stand on its own. We could take this comma out and put a period in, and it would be a complete sentence, an independent clause. Then we have, because we put a comma, we put in a fanboy, and then we put another independent clause. He makes fun of the teachers. He is the subject, makes is the verb, and he makes fun of teachers is a complete thought. So this could stand on its own as well. This is a compound sentence. Independent clause, comma, fanboy, independent clause. Poor Homer. Homer is just like a dependent clause. Poor guy. Well, what makes him dependent? Well, Homer is messed up when he is on his own. He makes mistakes, he does really silly things, and he doesn't think very much. Without Marge by his side, things go wrong. So he is dependent. Who is he dependent on? He is dependent on Marge and cannot survive without her. So what makes him like a dependent clause? Well, just like Homer, a dependent clause cannot survive by itself. It does not express a complete thought. It is not a sentence. Examples of dependent clauses. Until the next time I see him. It has a verb, it has a subject, but it doesn't have a complete thought. When I ran to the yellow house. Well, I is the subject, ran is the verb, but what's going to happen when you get there? Are you going to open the door? Are you going to go inside? Are you going to have some crazy old lady come after you saying, "Get out of my yard"? It doesn't express a complete thought. Although I want to get an A in math. Well, it has a subject, I. Want to get is the verb, but it doesn't tell you what happens if you don't get an A in math. It doesn't have a complete thought. So that brings us to those pink words that were on the previous slide. These are called awabises. These words are also known as subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunctions. And what they do is that they support a dependent clause. Kind of funny, right? They support a dependent clause. You will see an awabus before a dependent clause, and that's kind of how it signals. These are known as signal words, and we call them subordinating conjunctions. Awabus words because they signal the beginning of a dependent clause. That's all that they're doing, is they're going to signal that we have a dependent clause. So what are they? Well, each one of these letters stands for a word, and they are after, although, as, when, while, until, because, before, if, and since. awibus. Whenever you see these words, almost guarantee that you will have a dependent clause right after it. Well, why is this important? Well, because when you take a look at dependent clauses, they have to have an independent clause with it. And that makes a special type of sentence. And we're going to look at that here shortly. So here's a rule to know. A dependent clause must, have to, no ifs, ands, or buts, must have an independent clause by it to be a complete sentence. If it doesn't have an independent clause, it's not a complete sentence. So let's review the 3 types of sentences. Oh, but I've only taught you 2. Well, I'm going to introduce the 3rd sentence and explain it in more depth after this slide. So the first one is a simple sentence. That's an independent clause. That's a Marge sentence. We have compound sentences. And this is where we have an independent clause with a comma plus a fanboy plus another independent. Independent clause, comma, fanboy, independent clause. That is a compound sentence. And then the third one that I'm going to show you more detail on after this is called a complex sentence. This is where we have a Homer with a comma plus an independent. Or we can do an independent plus a Homer or a dependent clause. Dependent clause, comma, independent, independent clause, dependent clause. Here's something to note. If the dependent clause comes first, you have to have a comma. If the independent clause is first, no comma is needed. So let's look at these complex sentences a little bit closer. Okay, so complex sentence. This is where we're joining and they're going to marry and love each other for the rest of their lives. A Homer clause, which is a dependent clause, and a Marge clause, which is an independent clause. So we have a Homer, which is a dependent clause, comma, then a Marge clause, which is an independent clause. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. Until there's our awibus, Homer met Marge. This is needed, and this is the dependent clause, comma, he was a nobody. Now, because the dependent clause came first, you have to put in the comma. Now let's look at another way to write it. We can always put an independent clause first, then a Homer clause. If the independent clause is first, no comma is needed. So let's take a look at the same exact sentence, just putting the independent clause first. Homer was a nobody until he met Marge. Again, here is your independent clause. It could stand on its own. Until is the awibus. He met Marge is the dependent clause. This is the 2 ways to write a complex sentence. So let's make some complex sentences. The formulas are Homer plus Marge. Another way to put it is a dependent clause, comma, and then an independent clause. If you didn't notice, I made a mistake, so I just put it in on the slide here. Makes a complex sentence. Aww, aren't they so cute? Or we can do an Awabus plus a Homer. So it looks like this. Until Lisa goes to college, comma, she will have to live with her parents. When the grass turns green, comma, Homer will have to mow the lawn. After Bart passes third grade, comma, there will be a huge celebration. These are examples of complex sentences. Or, the second way that we can make a complex sentence is if we have a Marge plus a Homer. So an independent clause plus a dependent clause makes a complex sentence. It still makes a complex sentence, either way you look at it. Examples of complex sentences. Independent clause plus a Homer, dependent clause, no comma in the situation. Lisa will have to live with her parents until she goes to college. Homer will have to mow the lawn when the grass turns green. There will be a huge celebration when Bart passes third grade. Independent, Awabus, dependent. Independent, Awabus, dependent. Independent, Awabus, dependent. Let's practice types of sentences. So I want you to circle the correct answer to this sentence. Spillane Middle School is ranked #1 in the state of Texas. I would pause this and look back through your notes and see if you can figure out what the correct answer is. And I'll give you some time. And make sure you tell me how you can tell it. Okay, what kind of sentence is this? This is a simple sentence. But here's my question. How can you tell? Write your explanation here. Well, the reason why you can tell this is a simple sentence or a complete sentence is it has a subject, Spillane Middle School. It has a verb, is ranked, and it makes a complete sentence. It has a complete thought. So that's how you can tell it is a simple sentence. Let's go on to the next one. Mrs. Harris is quite a strange teacher, but Mr. Horner and Mrs. Elmer and Mrs. Martin and Mr. Thomas are even stranger. So, what kind of sentence is this? Go ahead and pause so that you can answer the question and look up the answer, and then answer the second part. How can you tell? So what type of sentence is this? Well, this is a compound sentence. The reason why it's a compound sentence is because it has this but here, and this is a fanboy. It has a comma and then a but. Miss Harris is quite a strange teacher is an independent clause, comma, but, which is a fanboy, Mr. Horner, Mrs. Elmer, Mrs. Martin, and Mr. Thompson are even stranger. That right there is another independent clause. So it is a compound sentence. That's how you can tell. Next sentence. Although I can't swim, the beach is a glorious vacation spot. What kind of sentence is this? And then explain to me how you can tell. I'll give you a few minutes. Pause so you can look back in your notes to confirm what you think this is. Okay, what kind of sentence is this? This is a complex sentence. How can you tell? Well, it has an awabus. So that means I have a dependent clause. I can't swim. Although I can't swim. Okay, well, you're dependent. Comma, so we have to have the comma. The beach is a glorious vacation spot, which is an independent clause. So you have a dependent clause, comma, the independent clause. That's how you can tell. Okay, end of the slide. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.